very much. I wanted us to reflect a little bit about what the song says in the lyrics. So the song goes and says, "My blood, oh mother, was spilled, drew a bread loaf on the street. Oh martyr of the bread has returned. Oh martyr, the bread has returned. Oh martyr, rise and burn." It goes on and say, why are you people saying father has died? You don't say father has died. Father lives in your wheat. Father lives in the olive trees and palm trees. The story of this song is very important in Tunisian history. It is a song written by Lazhar al-Dhawi in a period to document or to commemorate the bread riots or bread uprisings of December 1983, January 1984 in Tunis. After the IMF has decided or pushed the government to phase out the subsidies they have on Tunisia had on bread and flour. Just after that, there was uprisings all across the country that started from the south in the governorate of Gbili and went up north until the universities of the capital. And it was faced by a tremendous backlash that resulted in casualties, torture, and killing of a lot of students and also peasants that manifested their opposition to these policies. For us, this song represents a landmark for how the people can rise and how governments that are pushed under conditionalities of debt can react to people that stand for their rights. So this brings me to the theme of our discussion today. We want to go and the idea of holding this session today has three drivers behind it. The first is that the experience of Tunisia with regards to decolonization, reparations is not very known in the continental space. So this is a great occasion to have it discussed with you. The second is that Tunisia has gone through a very interesting process of requesting reparation post 2011 uprising in the context of transitional justice process. Mind you, it's a very uncommon thing to happen because the transitional justice processes do not usually address economic harms or inequalities. Rather, they address political and civic rights, cases of disappearances, killings, cases related to conflict. So somewhat, the mandate of transitional justice was stretched to include the reasons behind the uprising, which are the economic and social rights, which underpinned the violence that come afterwards. So that connection was very interesting, and there were public hearings about the situation. There was a very long investigation. There were consultations about what reparations should look like, including collective reparations and institutional reparations. Even legally, we set out a fund called the Dignity Fund that is intended to draw the resources for reparations and to finance both individual, collective reparations. So we want this whole process crystallized in two memorandums that were issued by the Truth and Dignity Commission. One directed to the former colonizer of Tunisia, which is France. The second was directed to the IMF and World Bank. And today, I have my colleague Ameni with me to take us through in detail what the memorandum, which is a very interesting piece that can be used forward for advocacy, what it was about and what are the arguments it presented. So the third reason for holding this session, as I say it, is that the initiatives that have been advanced by the African CSOs, scholars, advocates, and regional, national, as well as international spaces to request accountability. And I want to hope that after all of the three panelists have presented, that we reflect together on the ways forward and how we can strategize and learn from the experiences presented on the gaps that exist that prevent us from carving the way of reparations. So I want to start presenting my panelists. Ameni is a policy analyst at the Tunisian Observatory of Economy. She leads the impacts of debt and IFIs on economic and social rights in Tunisia and Swana region. We say Swana, which is the alternative for MENA. We don't have MENA. We have Southwest Asia and North Africa. And then she is also a PhD candidate at the University of Carthage, specializing in Africanization of international investment law. I am joined also by my colleague Afshin Nazir, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, working on the legal analysis policy as the legal analysis policy officer at Afrodad. She holds an honors Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Nairobi, a postgraduate diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law, which is currently pursuing a Master's of Law at the University of Nairobi. She is an internationally published author and researcher, having written on subjects including debt, tax, human rights, climate change, and with esteemed institutions such as University of Pretoria, University of Nairobi, Afronomics Law, and the Society of International Development. Welcome, Afshin. Afshin will walk us through the experience of the African People's Commission of Inquiry that was organized by Afrodad and in conjunction with Malawi Economic Justice Network and other partners, focusing on the consequences of policies propagated by International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which got out also a very strong and powerful judgment. We will then move with my colleague Samantha Kanyowangwa. I hope I got it right. I did, okay. Which is a legal and policy researcher working at the intersection of economic justice, sovereign debt, and human rights in Africa. Samantha holds a Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Zimbabwe, a Master's in Human Rights, Peace Development from Africa University, and executive certificates from the University of Cape Town and the Central European University. She is currently the coordinator of the African Sovereign Debt Justice Network hosted by Afronomics Law, where she coordinates research and advocacy activities across African countries on public finance, debt governance, and climate finance. Samantha will walk us through the intricacies of how can really debtor states hold creditors accountable? What are the gaps in the system? What are the loopholes? And how can we get around them and go forward? So I open the floor. Later we will open the floor for your interaction and deepenings. I give the floor to you, Ameni, to start with the first experience.
Thank you, Neda. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if it's okay. I don't know if it's working. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Aslema. Bonjour. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to be with you today to present the Tunisian case from the transitional justice experience we had after the 2011 uprising. So I'm gonna present some reflections or insights from a unique instrument, which is the memorandum sent to the IMF and the World Bank, which was sent by the Truth and Dignity Commission in 2019. So today I want to walk you through this experience, how the memorandum was built, what is its legal foundations, and most importantly, why it matters for us today when talking about reparative justice and reparation. First of all, I'm going to introduce the memorandum, but the story cannot be told without first okay, yes, please. Okay. So this is, I was talking about the institutional framework, the Truth and Dignity Commission. So I was saying that the story cannot be told without first looking at these institutions, the body who was responsible for the transitional justice process in Tunisia after the 2011 uprising. So its mission was to cover not only physical abuses but economic violation, corruption, crimes, natural resources exploitation. This institution was established by the Organic Law 53 2013 to uncover the truth and deliver justice for gross human rights violation, and it serves as the institutional foundation for this memorandum. So with this institutional background in mind, which is the Truth and Dignity Commission, this commission wrote a big report where it documents all the violation, human rights violation, not only the political violation to human rights, but also economic and social violations. So this memorandum is presented as a legal document, but also a political document. There were, as Nede mentioned, two memorandums, one sent to France, and it covers the colonial crimes during the colonial period and the economic exploitation, and the second one, which we are going to treat today, to present today, was sent to the IMF and the World Bank and covers the post-independence period, and it documents the abuses and violations of human rights, which was the result of the structural adjustment programs and all their conditionalities. So what is unique about this memorandum and about this document is that it is the first time that a Truth Commission in the Global South that holds international financial institutions accountable within a transitional justice process. So if we examine this document, we found it is a legal document. The memo is framed as part of Tunisia's legal obligation under transitional justice law to deliver reparative justice and guarantees of non-repetition. It uses legal methodology, tracing structural violence, sovereignty violation, and back its claims with evidence from the loan contracts, evidence from the agreements with the IMF, its different reviews, where we can find the policy conditionalities and all the reforms imposed by these institutions. So this document was not only a simple letter sent to the Bretton Woods institution, but it was very rich document because it represents a landmark and it is a legal and political document based on findings of a state-established commission, an official commission, and it is also a historical document because it covers all the period after the independence and even after the aftermath, the uprising, the 2011 uprising. So it is not only a legal document but also a political document, because if the Commission uses a legal methodology in its structure, it holds a very bold message, political message in it. So because this memorandum, its weight lies in what exposes its content and the accusation we find in it to these institutions. It exposes the historical trajectory of structural adjustment in Tunisia and the social and environmental impacts and harm that followed all these structural adjustment programs. So, to understand the content of this memorandum, we can just frame this in its historical context, which is the structural adjustment in Tunisia and the IMF and World Bank's intervention in our country, in my country. So we can see that after the independence, we can see the timeline here, different interventions from the mid-70s to the 2011 revolution. And even after the revolution, there were 3 more programs, the one in 2013, the other in 2016, and the last one during the COVID pandemic. So the successive governments signed these structural programs, and what the memorandum did is claimed that both institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, pushed the Tunisian government to freeze wages, to implement conditionalities, to reduce subsidies on basic consumer goods, which led to various uprising and social crises, like the one Neda told the story about, the bird riots. Also, there were the Gafsa mining basin uprising in 2008, and then the 2011 revolution. So the memo also goes further and argue that the debt, the Tunisian debt itself is odious, is illegitimate, and much of the debt was contracted under the ex-president Ben Ali, and it was a dictatorship, and it was for its benefit, not for the development of the country, or to consolidate and to consolidate a development model. So also, the cost was not only social, but environmental. The memo documented environmental and health harms due to the World Bank's projects that led to the destruction of the ecosystem, for example, in the region of Gafsa and the Gulf of Gabes. We can see here some images from these regions and the impact of the World Bank projects. So, and this memorandum poses a very important question: who is responsible for all this harm? Who is responsible for all these impacts on human rights? And the EVD, or the Truth and Dignity Commission, points directly the finger to the IMF and the World Bank, because it says they imposed harmful policies through long conditionalities, knowing the situation in Tunisia, and insistence on these reforms. So it was not just poor advice or we advise you to do this to give you money. It was a complicity, and it held them accountable. So this memorandum or these accusations would not be stand on their own without a strong legal foundation, and this is exactly what the memorandum set out to provide. If we examine this memorandum, which is, by the way, available on, you can scan the QR code on the little card we shared with you, and you can read this document. So you can read the memorandum and can find the foundations, the legal foundations of the Commission arguments, which draws on global instruments like some UN resolutions, like the basic principles on the right to remedy and reparation, the UN resolution on the impact of debt and human rights. So also, after publishing this memorandum, the UN expert Juan Pablo Boholavsky supported the memorandum's arguments, and we can see that in his report published in July 2019, he directly addressed IMF and World Bank complicity in reforms, and he said that these institutions can be accountable under international law, and that austerity policies during economic downturns can be proved, and we can hold these institutions accountable. So this memorandum didn't stop in just documenting and holding, documenting the violations and holding these institutions accountable, but asked for reparation and claimed for reparation. And these reparations, and what makes also this memorandum unique, is that the EVD, or the Truth and Dignity Commission, did not ask for financial reparations, but asked for a moral reparation, which is an official apology from these institutions, asked for financial compensation to individual victims, but also collective victims from the regions, and we used the term of région victime. Also asked for debt cancellation, and considered that the Tunisian multilateral debt should be erased, and because it's considered as odious debt. So this memo it holds a very bold message, as I mentioned it, because it reminds us that justice, it's not only legal, it's political and moral, and reparative justice means reclaiming our rights to development, not just financial reparations. Although this document is very important and it holds a very bold political message, unfortunately, the reports, the implementation of the reparation did not happen, and because there is a lack of political will, because there is a weak domestic support from political elites and international partners. So I invite you all to think together to see how the path forwards and what we can do as civil society organizations to make this memo operate this memo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amini, for your contribution. This I think one key element in our session today is to give an idea to our audience about the initiatives that were able to document the evidence against which no IMF or World Bank official can say, no, I didn't see, no, this didn't happen. And according to legal means. So, and grounded in international law. And this is also what the Commission of Inquiry of African People's Commission of Inquiry has also added to the table. And I here leave the floor to my colleague Afshan Nazir to walk us through this experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. Just waiting for the slides to come up. Yes. So, as Nada mentioned, mine will be giving further context on what Ameni has presented, but in the context of the Commission of Inquiry that we held in Malawi. So, this is really to advocate for the power of the people in pushing for justice. So, I will be taking a legal and debt lens to the conversation. We can move to. Okay. So, I'll start off by this first statement, that debt is not a neutral technical issue, neutral technical financial issue. It goes beyond just the budget books, it goes beyond ledgers, as our board trustee says, but it has other dynamics that are at play. So public debt contracts fall under the realm of public international law, private international law at the moment, and they're not publicly accessible, which means that my apologies, I've just seen my professor coming in, so now that makes the pressure much higher. So, yeah, they fall under the realm of private international law because they're not publicly accessible. Now, to make this debt justice a reality, what do we need to do? We need to take legal action, right? And one of the ways we did that was through simulating what that process could look like, which was through the Commission of Inquiry. Now, you can look at that cartoon as I speak. So basically, I am, could we go to the previous slide? Oh yeah, I'll just give you a background to the Commission of Inquiry. So, like I said, this was to simulate what an adjudication process will look like. Initially, you might have heard it was called a tribunal, but then later on we changed it into a Commission of Inquiry because the respondent was not represented in the room. So basically what we did here was we had 4 accusations, which I'll delve into. And then from those accusations, we had witnesses and victims give their testimonies, their lived realities with IMF programs, World Bank programs, and their experiences. Now, the conceptual foundations of the doctrine are laid in debt justice, the historical causality and reparations, as well as the underdevelopment of Africa. There's multiple scholars, Rodney, Amin, Orjo, who have written about how Europe developed by underdeveloping Africa. So those are some of the conceptual foundations. Now, we can move to the next slide. Okay. Now, from a transitional justice lens, why was the Commission of Inquiry important? Transitional justice has 4 pillars. The first 2, truth-seeking, as well as prosecution. That's what the Commission of Inquiry sought to do. And then, based on the findings, we advocate for reparations and reforms. Then, it's actually, just give me a moment. I'd like to open this on my laptop because it's hard to keep looking behind. Yes, so it also looks at a people-centered justice process as opposed to the legal processes which have proved problematic, and we'll get into that. We are documenting harm in people's own voices because we recorded testimonies from the lived realities of the people. We challenged official narratives such as the concept of legal immunity, and we also, like I said, evidence generation, produced alternative forms of evidence through testimonies, data, and lived realities. And also, it was a powerful tool to build political pressure. Soon after we concluded the event, we had the IMF officers reaching out to our partner in Malawi, asking them, how do we implement the recommendations that you have discussed during that Commission of Inquiry? So you can see, in a matter of days, we had a response from the IMF. Then, so it is a powerful tool to build political pressure. Now, there were 4 legal issues. There were 4 legal issues that we dealt with. These are debt, austerity, structural adjustment programs, and the global financial architecture. I will look at debt first. And I'll only look at the legal lens. So if you look at debt contracts, there are structural imbalances in the framing, in the formulation of debt contracts. For example, if you look at the interest rates, for Germany, it's 1.6%, but for Africa, it's 11%. Moving to accusation number 2, austerity. Now, this has become a tool of neoliberal governance for minimum state intervention, and it affects the fiscal sovereignty of African states. And how is this also a legal issue? Look at the doctrine of privity of contract. The parties entering into the contract have the power to decide the terms and conditions that are going to be put inside that contract, including these conditionalities. But something to think about is that the law of contract itself is based on English law. It's a colonial model that was imposed in our systems. Then also the debt servicing priorities that come through austerity measures, they affect human rights obligations. So one of the witnesses gave this, she's an elderly lady, she said she was in Nigeria before the austerity measures happened. And she said before fiscal consolidation, austerity happened in Nigeria, no one would be picking from a dustbin. But when the IMF entered, they saw poverty levels go higher. She cited the example of a debt that was taken in 1978, a $4 billion debt. By the end of about two or so decades, that debt had ballooned to $50 billion, from 4 to 50. I'd just like us to think about that. How exorbitant is that? Then, so debt and austerity, we're seeing them as a form of economic violence. And the UN Committee on Economic and Social Rights has consistently advised that austerity must not impact minimum obligations, but we see that continuing to happen. Now moving to accusation number 3, closely tied to accusation number 2. Number 3 is on structural adjustment programs. Now, the argument was that under the United Nations Charter, every state has the right to its own economic sovereignty, territorial sovereignty, hence it has the autonomy for its fiscal sovereignty. Now, IMF is not a party to the UN Charter. So you wonder, how does the IMF come into this equation? Because the IMF did not sign the UN Charter. So the IMF contravenes the international human rights law by directing the state on how to chart out its fiscal design. Then
Afshin, I will kindly ask you to take a slower pace so that the interpretation can follow.
Okay, my apologies. I tend to speak fast. I'll try and be slower, but let me know if I'm, again, becoming fast. So, the IMF is a non-state actor telling a state actor how to chart out its fiscal design. So there's the example of, in Ghana, one of the witnesses was giving us his experience in Ghana. And he said when fiscal consolidation and austerity measures conditionalities came to Ghana, they were advised to have a freeze on employment. And because of that freeze in employment, unemployment hiked, and this led to citizens resorting to illegal mining. So we saw a rise in illegal mining as well. So, that was one of the examples cited. We've given the example of the ballooning debt in Nigeria, and there's also, I believe South Africa and Nigeria also gave the examples of how their textile industries were decimated, from 200 textile industries to less than 20 industries because of structural adjustment programs. And there are several examples across the continent on how these structural adjustment programs have inhibited instead of promoting development. Now, the fourth accusation was on the global financial architecture. If we think about even the macroeconomics that have shaped Africa's economic ordering today, these are based on which scholars? Western scholars. So from the foundational level itself, the GFA is a Western model. And this is a debt in that context is used as a tool of economic subjugation, even in present day, even in modern day dynamics. So it's a form of neocolonialism perpetuated through debt, economic subjugation perpetuated through a financial tool. Now, those were the 4 legal issues. By the way, if you're interested, the recordings for the entire Commission of Inquiry are up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, so you can even watch and see in detail what all of this looked like, from the victims, the witnesses, and really some of the things Ameni has mentioned here on people speaking about, although she gave us the Tunisian context, you can see there's similarities in the experiences people have had across Africa in those, in those recordings as well. Now, we'll move to the next concept, which is on legal immunity. Now, a lot was discussed during that commission of inquiry. I'm choosing to focus on this because we're talking about holding international financial institutions accountable. I've cited here Article 3 of the IMF Articles of Agreement, which gives the IMF immunity from judicial process. Okay, my apologies, I'm doing it again. So, Article 3 gives the IMF immunity from judicial process. For the World Bank, there are different articles of agreement for the different branches. So the kind of immunity, you'll see it different from one branch of the World Bank to another. But generally, the concept of immunity exists, it cuts across the IMF and the World Bank's branches. Now, for the IMF, as we can see, this is absolute immunity. For the World Bank, depends on the branch. Now, we'll move to, so during the commission, we talked about the legal arguments against immunity. And so we can move to the next slide. Yeah, and I'm very happy that Dr. Leila is in the room because I'm about to cite her. So, international law recognizes that immunity cannot shield the systematic violations of jus cogens or peremptory norms, those norms that cannot be derogated from under international law. So, I'll be building upon the arguments that Dr. Leila raised, our lead counsel raised during the commission of inquiry. So number one is violation of jus cogens, like I've said. Now, when you think about the quota allocations that were formed within the international financial institutions, when were these formed? During colonial times. And segregation was being done based on race during those times. So there has to be prohibition against that kind of racial discrimination. So no immunity protects that sort of institutionalized discrimination, whether it's through political exclusion or it's through economic subjugation. So that's point number one. Point number two is the right to development. So in 1986, the United Nations Declaration on the Right to Development came out, and it set out the right to development as an inalienable human right. Now, the IMF and the World Bank, as I've explained through those accusations, as Ameni has explained through the Tunisian experience, they have led to a breach of the right to development. Now, Leila also cited for us the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Waite and Kennedy versus Germany, which established that international organizations' immunity is not absolute. And I'll focus on 2 points here. Why is it not absolute? One, because it must be balanced against fundamental rights. And number two, you cannot have absolute immunity where no alternative remedy exists. So I'll read this. Immunity of international organizations cannot be a license for impunity. Immunity is only lawful if there are reasonable alternative avenues for redress. For African communities harmed by IMF and World Bank policies, no such avenues exist. And where such avenues exist, often where domestic courts are used or other sorts of courts, other legal fora are used, the IMF and the World Bank tend to rely on the defense of immunity. So this principle has also been echoed in subsequent cases.
So I'm going to ask you if if it's still long, maybe we can continue in the second round.
Oh, I've taken too much time. I'll wrap up very quickly.
Okay.
Okay. So then we have Article 2.1 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which mandates states to use maximum available resources for realizing their social and economic rights. And when the IMF and the World Bank are telling a state to use 60-70% of the revenues on debt servicing, that breaches that obligation. And finally, we have the ultra-vires doctrine, where the IMF and the World Bank, their mandate initially was reconstruction post-World War, but now it was then changed to promote development and stability. But their policies have failed to achieve that development and stability and instead have done the opposite. So I'll leave it there. Maybe I can speak on the pathways forward during the panel discussion.
Great. We will still want to have a deepening round, so, but I'm afraid I will be asked for very high reparations afterwards from the other panelists, so about time allocation. So I open the floor for Samantha, I think to build in the same direction of what was started already by Afshin, and this also brings us to how experiences are complementary. So tell us, Samantha, can states really hold IFIs accountable? We spoke to the legal immunity, but what other ways can we talk about?
Thank you, Nada. Thank you to my wonderful panelists who have started the conversation. Amini spoke about the Tunisian experience, and my thoughts are, I think, as she mentioned, it's a very historic process that was done through the Memo, because when you look at it, this is the first state-led transitional justice process that actually identifies that international financial institutions should actually bear some kind of responsibility for the harm that they cause to the people. And I think that is the very important aspect we need to take away from this, because it's not enough to just say an economic policy is bad, like the conditionalities by the IMF are bad. Those bad conditionalities have actual impacts on the average person from that particular country. So in the Tunisian experience, the average Tunisian was actually affected, and they need to be compensated for that actual harm. Same as whatever conditionalities that happen in our different countries, there should be some kind of compensation that comes to the people for the economic harm that they would have experienced through the structural adjustment programs, for example, or the austerity measures that are continuously imposed on us through, by the IMF through their advice, right? So even in the Kenyan context where Ashton is coming from, when we look at the protests, we need to be asking what kind of compensation did the IMF give us, or we actually should be demanding for that compensation, because there was destruction that happened through the protests. And get this, they knew that if they continued to push for the finance bill, as it were, there were going to be possibilities of protest. And the protest happened, and there was destruction, there was loss of lives that happened. Where's compensation for that? And we're not saying compensation will be enough for, us to then say, okay, so it's okay that our people died. But it's a step in acknowledging that they're at fault. And it also helps us with the healing process, hence the transitional justice aspect that both my colleagues were speaking about. Now, can we hold creditors to account for all of these issues according to the law? It's very difficult because our international economic law does not provide for such mechanism. And I think Ashin touched on it when she was talking about how these discussions are mostly under private law and not public law, which would then encompass the international economic law I'm talking about. But there have been examples where countries have managed to at least take their creditors to court. And I'll give some examples. Mozambique, for example, there's the famous 2 billion tuna bond case that Mozambique was part of. So it was the finance minister who got some loans from one Western bank, it's called Credit Suisse, and another Russian facility. And he got these funds without parliamentary approval, which is a story that we all know in our African settings. Rarely is there parliamentary approval when these loans are contracted, and so it means there's no consent from the people. But he went ahead, got that money, and then corruption happened, looting, etc., etc. And so the result was that it was then, found out that, oh, there was actually 2 billion that was contracted, and it did nothing for the maritime projects that was supposed to do for Mozambique. And of course, he was then tried. Well, he tried to run away first, but then he was then captured, he was tried. But it was not enough for the Mozambican government. They had to actually sue Credit Suisse and the Russian facility because they knew that there was no parliamentary approval. They were part of the looting that also happened. And so this has then happened. But as you might know, when these contracts are signed, there's usually a clause that says, in the case of dispute, then the resolution would happen in such jurisdiction. And unfortunately for us, in most cases, the jurisdiction is often in the creditors, the creditor countries. So for example, it's usually in the UK or in the US, in the New York and London. And so the conversation then happens at that level where we are in the New York courts or we're in the London courts. But the verdict has been quite positive for the Mozambican government. And so that's one case where we can actually say, you know, the Mozambican government took the creditors to court and they actually are going to be compensated, or at least some funds are going to be coming back to the government of Mozambique. But like I said, the jurisdiction is an issue because we're not always certain that it's going to be a fair kind of trial. You know, it's a creditor that is from America and they're being tried in a New York court, and we're Africans. We're coming from Zimbabwe, we're coming from Kenya, we're coming from Ghana, we're coming from all these different countries. Are we certain that there's not going to be any bias? We're never certain. And there's a case where this actually happened, where it was not in favor of the African government, and yet we actually knew that, you know, if the law is actually read and interpreted in the way that it should be, then we are supposed to be getting such a verdict in our favor. And so it happens, and this is one of the issues that we raise when we talk about how we need to make sure that our contracts that we are signing are actually very fair and equitable to both the creditors and the debtors. So now, essentially it's calling for reform in the jurisdictions, but that's a piecemeal kind of solution because we don't want any kind of reform in the jurisdictions there in the New York or in London. We want to have a legal mechanism that allows us all, whether you're coming from the global north or the global south, to have a voice, to actually stand in a court of law and argue your case, and your case is actually read and interpreted according to the ambits of the law and not, you know, according to any kind of bias that may actually happen. And so the conversation has been about we need to have such discussions, at least led by the UN. The UN, the United Nations, would then be the one to assist in the creation of such a legal mechanism. So this absence of a legal framework that assists with all these legal conversations when you're talking about debtors and creditors and the whole dispute resolution is the issue that we have been trying to advocate for and call for this UN mechanism. And just in end of June into July, there was the severe platform for action where, you know, there was a talk about how we need to have a reform of the global financial architecture in different areas, your trade, your debt, your tax, and all of those critical areas. But for the debt, the core was to have this legal framework. If we do not have this legal framework, it means that each country is just going to be, taking a different approach to how they deal with their dispute resolution. And it's never guaranteed that there's not going to be any bias in that creditor jurisdiction court that is going to be used. So I think the clarion call really has been, we need to have a legal framework that ensures that it's a predictable approach where we all know that if we're going to have any dispute resolution that needs to take place, any arbitration that needs to take place, we have a platform that we can all go to. This platform is neutral. It's not a creditor jurisdiction. It's not a debtor jurisdiction. They're just a jurisdiction that's there to hear these issues. And what's interesting is that, you know, there's the ICID, for example, but this is for investment issues, and it also has its issues, I'm afraid, but at least they have a platform that really just looks at that, and that's a first step. Then we look at how that platform would be designed to ensure that it's very, aware of the laws and how to interpret them in a fair and transparent manner, and make sure that those who are accountable should actually be held accountable. So that's the challenge that we have. There's no legal framework that governs debt resolution or debt dispute resolution. And can we hold creditors to account? We can, but it's a large toll if you're doing it alone. The call is to have all African governments come together and, you know, go to these international spaces and call for a legal framework that will govern the whole of the world to ensure that we have very fair and transparent approaches to this questions.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Thank you for this insightful presentation. Then I wanted to maybe challenge you through your presentation. So what I wanted to reflect on is that now you are saying that we don't have a legal framework, but still Afshin said that immunity is opposable, and if immunity is opposable, in which spaces we can challenge the immunity and go forward. And I don't know if you can both speak to that. And also, maybe if you want to react on possibly this piece that we presented from the Tunisian transitional justice process, how can it be used in one or the other forums to drive forward a battle on the ground and mobilize, and also, and how much should it depend on political will, or should it be driven also by other civic actors? I leave it to you to interact freely.
Yeah, on the first one on immunity, you'll note that my responses were more towards the Western banks as the creditors or the governments, but not the international financial institutions. And it was because Afshin had spoken about the immunity problem. The IMF has immunity. But with the World Bank, as she explained, it varies. For example, if it's the International Financial Corporation, the IFC, they can actually be taken to court. There's a case, GEM versus IFC, GEM as your marmalade GEM versus IFC. So it's possible to take that branch of the World Bank to court because it's a commercial type of arm of the World Bank. So it's very difficult now to then go to the World Bank or the IMF and say, we want to scrap off your immunity. Obviously, they will not agree to that because that immunity protects them from millions and millions, I would say, of cases that would be brought by, all the different countries in the global south. And so, for me, it's about the reform of the global financial architecture in totality. Once we have done away with the current system as is, and we have created a very fair and transparent system, which I think should be under the United Nations, and not to say the United Nations is perfect, but if you're in the other room, when I spoke before, I highlighted that United Nations for us at the present moment represents a very democratic platform for us to be talking about these issues because at least at the United Nations, each country has its own voice. So one country, one vote. It's different from, the IMF where the whole of Africa, we've got our quotas, which also then translates into our voting rights at about 6%. The whole of Africa, which means each country has got like 0.0 something percent until it adds up to 6%. The United States of America has got 18%. So it's crazy. You can't go to the IMF and say you want to scrap off your immunity. We need to do away with the IMF and the World Bank as those who are at the helm of our economic governance and move towards the United Nations where at least we'll have a voice and say something about these issues. Once we've done that, we then create a new economic governance system that ensures that all these issues are raised and we can then stand in a court of law and argue these issues. On your second point, it was about how do we utilize the gold we have in the Tunisian experience to ensure that we actually call for reparations in the same way in the context of transitional justice. And for me, I think it would be presenting such a case of the Tunisian experience to the African Union. And then the African Union then mobilizes the countries to ensure that we are all in unison and understand how the Tunisian experience took place and how we can leverage on that. Because as long as we're still working in silos, then we're not doing anything. It's the same fragmented approach that is still happening today. We need to have a coordinated voice on how we'll approach the international level of the discussions. So I'll leave maybe Afshin to add more.
Great, thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Nada. I'll build on that. So the first question was on the spaces on challenging immunity.
Let me ask you if you want us to also put back your presentation if you want to jump.
I'll connect it through the...
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Actually. So no problem, I'll finish up the pathways forward as I'll connect it to your questions. So the first one was on spaces on challenging immunity. So Samantha has mentioned the case of Kenya. There's currently a case there's currently an odious, a case where it's been instituted against about 19 respondents, brings in the current president, the former president, a number of institutions responsible for debt management, And what's interesting is one of the respondents in that case is the IMF. So that's another avenue where the IMF can come and say, we are immune, you cannot sue us. So which is where these arguments against immunity become relevant. I'll connect this also to the issue of reparations. When we are currently doing some research on debt and reparations, and we argue for the African Court on Human and People's Rights as one possible legal forum to bring in such issues. There's also the International Court of Justice, which is basically the highest court we could go for. And then there's also this debate around the ICSID tribunal. So increasingly we are seeing countries also use arbitration as a forum to bring in debt issues. But this is controversial because they are interpreting investment, debt as an investment within the treaty, which is problematic because in a space like that, you would not be considering human rights. It's more commercial. You're looking at, this is a contract between a lender and a borrower, and these are the terms, and this is the arbitration coming in to resolve that. So just wanted to highlight that that could be problematic. But the spaces where we can challenge ACHPR, ICJ, domestic courts, and then there's also an international legal void on an adjudication mechanism for debt disputes, which, as Samantha mentioned, there's a void on the legal framework as well at the international level. So apart from the FFD4 process, there's also the African Union Declaration on, the Lome Declaration. It's the declaration that came up from the AU inaugural debt conference. And even in that declaration, paragraph 44, it calls for a legally binding mechanism on debt that is transparent, that is inclusive. So just wanted to highlight that as well. And using the Tunisian piece moving forward, the Tunisian experience has been, I think the peer-to-peer learning would be one of the key highlights from the Tunisian experience, because there's a lot that other countries on the continent can learn. The aspects of violations of sovereignty, the aspect on imposition of conditionalities, the aspect of odious debt. There's obviously the Mozambican case that Samantha has mentioned. There's the Kenya odious debt case. There's also, I'm forgetting the third one, but yeah, those two. So there is a lot of peer-to-peer learning that can be done because there are similar elements. And I'll connect this to the pathways forward that I wanted to speak about. Samantha has mentioned having a new global fund. And that's something we discussed during the Commission of Inquiry as well. How relevant are these institutions anymore? These institutions were created 80 years ago for post-World War reconstruction for Europe. They are not relevant anymore. We do not see them pushing development. We do not see them pushing stability. In fact, they are doing the opposite. So do we even need the IMF and the World Bank anymore? One of the witnesses said, just do away with the funds, do away with the fund, create a new international economic order, base it on a democratic governance structure where countries are represented in equal capacity. And also the quota system needs to be based on fair allocations, not the way it is currently based on colonial, the allocations that were set during colonial times. I'll now just touch on pathways forward, or do you want me to do that later? I've spoken on one. Or I can continue. So also, So the kind moderator has given me a few minutes to finish this up. So also on pathways forward, especially in the context of reparations, the international financial institutions need to recognize officially the negative impact that the conditionalities are causing. So that comes in the form of a formal apology. Second, establish a reparation fund. So this would be relevant to compensate for the harm that has been caused through austerity. So the financial implications on austerity measures, should the international financial institutions not pay for them under a reparation fund? Then there's the aspect of legislation. Yesterday we were told subjugation happened through law, so reparations must also happen through law. When Germany was, actually it's still ongoing, the whole situation with Germany giving reparations to Israel, it happened through a law. It was done in 3 parts, and one of those parts was a law. And under that reparations law, it was provided for the individual compensation from Germany to the victims of the Holocaust was provided for under that reparations law. So even now, as we're talking about reparations, holding IFIs accountable, do it through the law. Then there's a question of legitimacy of debts and odious debts. That's also a conversation we are looking at very deeply at Aphrodite. So we're looking at how do we reconceptualize odious debt as opposed to Alexander Nahum Sachs' definition of 1927, which was in the context of state succession. How do we reconceptualize it for it to fit the modern day definition of modern day application of odious debt? What are the kinds of debt we can say are odious? And where under international law would that odious debt doctrine lie? Because right now it's a matter of transnational public policy. So we're also pushing to have odious debt recognized as a part of international law, something that's normative, something that has a normative framework and is binding. Thank you, Nada.
Thanks very much, Afshin. Ameni, do you want to interact with the presentations?
Maybe I'll just add about the legal framework. That's right, that there is a void in the international framework, but as we can see through the memorandum, there is a set of what we call soft law that we can build on and use, like the UN Convention on Remedy and Reparation. It's not a convention, sorry, it's a resolution, and also the other resolution on the 2016 resolutions on the impact of external debt and human rights, and also the UN, the UNICTAD resolution on the UN sovereign debt framework that also can, we have to push forward, and it represents like a foundation to continue our call for like a hard law instruments on the international level.
Thank you very much, Ameni, for your insight. Okay, so the floor is up to you. Please, I will give you the mic. Or do we have another mic, dear technical team? I don't want to lose my authority. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for your help.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Abbas. I'm an economist and researcher. It's really a very insightful presentation that links the colonial violations in 1940 and 50s with the IMF structural adjustment programs in 1980s to the Arab Springs uprisings in 2010-11, because they are all connected. So I would like to ask, apart from the this Tunisian case that connects these three cases, this commission that has been established in 2013, I would like to know what are the achievements? You've mentioned some challenges, of course, legal, political. So I would like to know what are the achievements, if any, and if it is still in progress and there are challenges, what are the main challenges that that this commission faced that African countries learn from? Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. My name is Grace from Kenya, and I wanted to ask the question about the reparation fund, or the possibility of a new global fund. My question is, who will run the fund and how will these funds be meted out? What will be the rationale? Because my fear is that we are going to get ourselves into another situation that the money coming in will just get out in the forms of illicit financial flows. So I would really love to hear your thoughts.
Great. Please.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Amini, Afshin, and Samantha for the insightful presentations. Mine is not really a question, but a comment on the presentation. So from where I stand, from all your presentations, it seems as if Africa does not belong to us as Africans due to the legal structures or systems that are in place, the global financial architecture. So I always say that in the current systems that we do have, Africans, we are just tenants and citizens or residents in countries that are not even our own. So we really need to reform the global financial architecture. And I read something on reparations, going to your issue, Afshin, on immunity. There is the statute of limitations, which has been used by the European countries to say colonialism, slavery has been done. It's a long case, it's a long history, so that the time frame has lapsed for it to be legally put into the courts. They've been using that. They are saying it's an intergenerational thing, and we cannot punish the current generations for the crimes that have been committed by their forefathers. Then again, there is the issue of sovereign immunity when it comes to reparations, where they are saying a state cannot be legally held to account without its permission. So these issues that have to do with the immunities, we really need to do away with them and have a legal framework that works for us as Africans. Thank you.
Sorry, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to continue from where he stopped. My name is journalist from Nigeria. Having listened to discussions from yesterday and then today, and then I'm thinking, yesterday I was discussing with somebody, and then I said, we are going to ask these countries to do the needful based on their good nature. And I've realized that people will only do what, or states will do things if it's going to benefit them. And then the argument that whatever they did was years ago, decades ago, I think, I'm thinking, is it possible to make the people? Because until the people in Africa stood up, the leaders were doing what they wanted and getting away with it. Like the case of Tunisia, the people had to stand up. Kenya, the same thing. Is it possible to make citizens in the United States, in the UK, to hold their leaders accountable if we make them see that what happened years ago is still affecting them now? Because when you talk of immigration, people going there to stay, it's because of decades of neglect that happened in Africa that are making people to move to their own side. So is it possible to get their people involved? Because they are not benefiting, they may not be benefiting from what their leaders are doing now, since it's a private thing. So is it possible that aside the work we are doing in Africa, we can also move it there and let them know that if they hold their leaders accountable and they release the hold on Africa, it will benefit them in the long run, because people won't have to live where they are staying, where they are suffering, to go and inconvenience them there. Because there are a lot of things happening now that they don't like it. So if we make them see reasons that if you hold your leaders accountable and they release the hold they have on Africa, it can be better for them. Can we take it from that angle as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will take a last question and then we take interactions. Is that okay?
Thank you very much.
Please.
I think the discussions since yesterday and today are very exciting. I just want to actually ask a question for all of us to actually reflect over it. Within the context of Africa, they are pushing democracy. Governments have 4 years, 5 years, and when they want to be re-elected, they are looking at 4 or 5 years. So, given that they actually hold the power, quote unquote, how can we actually make sure that we dismantle the type of system where we can actually have what I'll call a global alliance of locals in Africa to actually push an agenda that can force our governments to actually make sure that they put this as one of the key things going forward. Linked to that actually also has to do with the fact that we are actually operating with different currencies in Africa. Everybody wants to have his own currency. Until maybe we reflect and see how we can push the African Union to start thinking of an agenda where we have a unified currency as a starting point to fight this, it will be very difficult. Sam Danse is my name, and I work for ISODEC Ghana.
Thank you very much, everyone. So, anyone wants to interact, maybe? Do you want to start, Samantha?
I can start, yeah.
Okay.
I'll start with the last question that has been just posed. And it brings me to think about the point that Don Dare from Pan-African Lawyers Union yesterday spoke about when we were saying, oh, you know, we've always known there's IQ, the intelligence quotient, there's the EQ, emotional intelligence quotient, but maybe we need to start thinking about the PAQ, and he said this means Pan-Africanism quotient. We need to have our leaders have that Pan-Africanism behind them, that ideological background that will then ensure that, you know, they are aware of these issues, they are connected to these issues, both emotionally and you know, intellectually, to an extent that they would be able to stand in a room, you know, whether it's at the United Nations or whatever platform it may be, and argue for reparations. As it stands, unfortunately, in most cases, governments, the leaders, they mostly want to shy away from these kind of discussions because they're thinking, okay, so if I start talking about reparations, what will it do to the prospects of funding? You know, if you're saying to your creditor, I'm actually not going to pay this debt because it's an odious debt, can you come back tomorrow and say, can I please borrow money? It's difficult. But it's a very difficult conversation we have to have because we were wronged, and that needs to be corrected, which is why it is part of transitional justice. And so even the African Union, I think the African Union has got a lot of work to do, and maybe this is why they thought about having this year run under the theme, you know, the year of reparations. But they've gone further to even say we actually need a decade of reparations. So now we're looking at a decade of reparations. And it's that realization that, you know, you can't achieve all these discussions in a year. It will take a long time. And unfortunately, it means some governments would have changed by the time we get to 2026 at the end of the decade. But hopefully, when we have those changes in governments, those leaders are able to still continue the discussion around reparations without fear of what kind of risks that they would face if they were to speak about this very sensitive discussion, but important discussion. And I'll speak to what Doc has said and say, so she was saying, is it possible to talk to, to at least influence the Americans or the Europeans in their totality and say, actually push your governments to ensure that they you know, deal with this reparations issue. And I'd like to say, you know, as civil society organizations in Africa working on the debt question, AfroDebt leads it's sort of like we discussed this yesterday, it's a membership organization, so it's sort of like the umbrella organizations working on debt. And so we also have that kind of format in the European setting where we have Eurodebt, so it's the European Network on Debt and Development. We also have some partners that we work with, the Jubilee USA and Debt Justice USA. So all these organizations, they're organizations that are partners with us, African civil society organizations, that are working in Europe, in the America, and they also, support this clarion call for reparations. So they can only do so much. They're also trying as much as possible to push their governments to ensure that, they heed this call on reparations. Unfortunately, it's not just on reparations, but on a number of issues. And you might have heard by now, the UK and America are quite problematic when it comes to all these discussions about, let's move from the IMF and the World Bank and go to the UN, or any kind of solution that you might have heard so far. There's always a pushback from these governments, despite the work that our partners in those areas are also doing to ensure that this is what happens. So it's a political process at the end of the day. As civil society organizations, they can only do so much, but it's the politics of the day and the geopolitics, which are not looking so good at the present moment with Trump at the helm of the world. I think I'll let my colleagues respond to the other questions.
Maybe I'll answer the first question about the achievement of the Truth and Dignity Commission. Unfortunately, this commission ended its mandate in 2019, just after publishing its report and the memorandum. And the whole transitional justice process ended with the 2021 constitutional reform, or what politics or political science scholars call auto coup. So if we talk about achievements, the fact that we have documented all this repression from the post-independence period until the 2013, it is something. And we have thousands and thousands of testimonies that were collected. For the political challenges, as I mentioned, the whole transitional process, the government declared it has ended. And also there is a very lack of political will to continue this transitional justice process. And even the elites or scholars, we noticed that there is not research or writings about the whole experience.
I give the floor to you, Afshin, and then maybe I will have some also aspects to add to the same conversation. Let's hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Nada, and thank you, my fellow panelists, and thank you all for the very insightful comments and questions. I believe only two remained for me to address. One was on the reparation and a new global fund. You asked who will run the fund and how will these funds be meted out, especially with fears around IFFs and corruption. Now, I believe this is a research question for all of us, but I would suggest the United Nations as a central, at least democratic place to start off the conversation on establishing a new global fund. Through the financing for development process, countries across the globe have committed to taking steps to close the gaps in the global debt architecture. So maybe this could be one of those conversations we are having at that level to close the gap in the global debt architecture by establishing the new global fund. Like I said, United Nations, and then how will they be meted out? This could be, I'm thinking off the top of my head, direct transfers to countries. We can also look at individual compensations. But this is a very broad question and a good one, and it can definitely be something for us to think about research question. This could be your next thesis. So those are my initial thoughts on that question. Now, as for the using or requesting citizens in global north countries to push our calls for justice, Samantha mentioned we have we call it the DADS family. So there's Afro-DAD, Euro-DAD, Latin DAD, and the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. So we strategize together on pushing the debt agenda at global level. So I'll cite one example. There is one of our partners in the UK is pushing to have English law reformed on contracts. And why is this important? Because many debt contracts tend to follow English law. So since that is not being changed, then let's change the law that is applying to those contracts. So that's one way in which the global, not civil society, is trying to help us out, among the many others, like I said, working together as the dads on the global debt agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contributions. Maybe a small follow-up comment on the achievements of the Truth and Dignity Commission. As Amini said it so well, I think it's memory that has been collected and documented, and all the investigations and analysis that have been there can be used by anyone that follows. Now, it's true that the political situation is not in the best cases, and let's face it, neither individuals have gained, have had their rights recovered through the tribunals, special tribunals on transitional justice for the cases of violence. And neither victim regions got compensation, neither there was a reform, because in the end of the day, the state is going to implement, and the state, it's the administration that holds the power, and the administration is also among the actors that enacted the violence. So there was a political momentum to push back at a certain point, but the backlash we had afterwards has prevented anything from to happen. But what we are happy with is that even the legal foundation is laid. When we say that there is 2 memorandums for France and IMF, there is also a legal fund for reparations that is in place within the law. It means that anyone that can come next, we should continue pushing for a more democratic situation. But anyone that can jump and request for reparation, there is the legal foundation for it, and we can find the evidence ready. And we hope that we will continue pushing to happen, especially jumping on what everyone has said. I think in the common battles, we cannot do, as Samantha did, things alone, because it's a big toll. We need to strategize together and see how through peer learning we can share experiences, and also through common mechanisms we can do actions together collectively on a civil society level, academia level, but hopefully at a continental level as well, as the decade for reparation is now declared by the AU. I want to open again the floor to catch 1 or 2 questions, because we still have 10 minutes. But if you are too hungry, and any other questions? Oh, okay. Everybody's hungry. Is it on WhatsApp? Can you read it? We apologize for our online viewers. We haven't set a mechanism to get the questions from them, but there is a last question. As we are analyzing some loan contracts, we find in many loan contracts of the World Bank with the Tunisian government or state-owned companies, there is no dispute resolution article. There is no possibility to press charge against the World Bank in any kind of way. So I think, and what are the organisms linked to the World Bank that don't have immunity? I think this question was answered some way when we talked about the IFC. So the IFC can be held accountable and doesn't have immunity because it has a commercial status. But for the World Bank, maybe you can talk about it again. And I don't know, I think you did answer the question, but if we can say it again. Okay, do you have the mic?
Okay, so on immunity, I'll repeat. For the IMF, Article 3 on the Articles of Agreement, absolute legal immunity from judicial process. For the World Bank, Samantha has mentioned the IFC. We also have 4 other branches of the World Bank. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head which one is absolute and which one is not, but you can check the articles of agreement and you'll find the information there. Generally, for the World Bank, where that immunity, exception to that immunity comes in the case of commercial disputes. So that's the general trend, but again, forgive me, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I have read it in the articles for the different branches. If you do refer to those articles, you will see to what extent that immunity applies.
Thank you very much, Afshin. Okay, I will round up and maybe thank everyone that was present here and give the mic to the panelists for a final word of or a reflection going forward.
Okay, the final word, I think it's very important for us to take these discussions back home. Analyze what this odious debt is all about, analyze what reparations could look like, the various forms they could take. Also realize that debt cancellation is an actual form of reparations. We can actually call for debt cancellation. And yeah, try as much as possible to read around these issues so that, you know, as we get into the decade of reparations, we are fired up about this discussion.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, everyone. So I think asking for reparations starts for asking even from our fight for transparency, our fight for knowing where these loans come from, knowing what is in the loan contracts that our governments are signing with these creditors. Also, one important thing is the citizens' audit that can be a foundation to ask for reparation that in our countries citizens can ask for. Also on the international level, momentums like the FFG or all these international forums can be an occasion to ask for our government to be active and be Africans, as the Aphrodite slogan, to no more as rule takers, but as rule makers. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll finish off by saying that political sovereignty is nearly meaningless without economic dignity. And the political, economic, legal lenses are all connected. As I mentioned earlier, as was mentioned earlier during the discussions yesterday, that the law was used as an instrument of subjugation. And it is through the law that reparations can actually come into force. I give the example of Germany, so that's something for us to think about. And then there are multiple justifications for reparations. There are legal justifications, there are institutional, political. I think focusing on each of those, depending on our different areas of expertise, really builds a stronger case for Africa. Because if Ghana alone is fighting for reparations, Kenya is fighting alone for reparations, it won't be as powerful as the African continent coming together through the AU and fighting for reparations. And finally, my last point, I'll connect it to the financing for development process. There is the paragraph that came through the Seville commitment, which talks about establishing an intergovernmental process to close the gaps in the global debt architecture. This is the conversation for that intergovernmental process. Let's connect the debt and reparations aspect as we are trying to establish a new economic order. We can think about a new fund. We can think about a new legal mechanism. So that, I think, is a $1 million opportunity for us to start finding solutions to our debt problems, debt architecture problems at a global level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Maybe I will jump as I conclude on the comment that was raised by one of the colleagues in the Q&A that said that it seemed that Africa did not belong to us Africans. And also that the argument that was opposed also always is that time has lapsed and that we cannot make the new generations of Europeans pay. But what about African new generations that are still paying the burden of the debt with their the lack of development in their country and forced to migrate and go into vulnerable routes for unstructured employment. So we have to challenge these narratives and act collectively. And I think with the multiple expertise that we have seen yesterday and that is around the room today, I think this is possible. And thank you very much. Thank you.